I go on the Africa trip and I remember thinking, have I missed something? Because what I saw was an incredibly serious world leader who, was really at ease around others, spoke directly with leaders in a way I could tell they really respected and responded to very well. What if moments like that had in fact been at the outset of her vice presidency? What if that had been sort of the first impression Americans had of their vice president? Would we be having this conversation? Is Kamala Harris prepared for the presidency to the degree that we are today?
All right, we are back with Elaina Plott Calabro from The Atlantic. Welcome back to the Bulwark Podcast. Been wanting to chat with you. How you doing, girl?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Tim. I've missed y'all.
Who would have thought? Here you are, Kamala Harris expert. We're bringing you on for your Kamala Harris expertise in this moment of uncertainty. You had written you wrote one profile called The Kamala Harris Problem, about 6 months ago? Mm-hmm. And did a follow-up here during this potential interregnum or this time of uncertainty. And so I just kind of wanted to go a little bit deeper on her and, just start us off with kind of the Reader's Digest version of what your main takeaways were from all the time you got to spend with the VP.
Yeah, so a lot of time is right. I think over the course of my reporting, my profile of her last year, I traveled with her to Africa, to Nevada, to California, to Georgia, so various states, and then, a bunch of different countries in Africa. So by the end, I certainly had spent a great deal of time with Kamala Harris. And I think through not just getting to know her, but getting to know people around her, getting to know people in the West Wing, who, would actually speak to me for the story. What I came away feeling pretty clearly is that, and this is sort of what I talk about in my piece that came out this week, is that the Biden administration really kind of fumbled the ball when it came to preparing her for the presidency or putting her in a position to where if he were to have to step aside for whatever reason, Americans would have confidence that she could lead this country capably.
And, how do you think, I guess actually before I guess I was going to ask how you think she found herself in this situation, but I think a more direct question to that is first talking about the Biden of it all rather than the Kamala. Why do we think he picked her? I think that has been like a fundamental question, I think, as we get through all of this. As there is these concerns and whispers from Biden world that maybe, she's not up for this, and that might be informing, him, not wanting to step aside. In your piece, they don't provide a lot of color about the president's view on her. What was your sense for why she was in the vice presidency in the first place?
Well, unfortunately, I think for the West Wing, the country more broadly, it wasn't really a complicated decision process. So he had laid out this marker that he wanted to choose a woman. And then he had Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, with whom he's quite close and was quite instrumental in delivering South Carolina, say to him, I'd really encourage you to choose a Black woman. So, it came down to women like Karen Bass, Kamala Harris, and ultimately Kamala Harris just struck the search committee as possibly better prepared. But I will say, Tim, the huge impediment to choosing her, and one thing that Joe Biden really struggled to get past in particular, was just how much Kamala Harris had attacked him on the debate stage. Your listeners will recall, I'm sure, that little girl is me moment and bringing up his past support for busing and things of that, opposition to busing and things like that. So for Jill Biden, especially, that was difficult to get past. And Kamala Harris, I think one way she was really able to win over the search committee was making very, very clear that for her, there was, all she saw as the duty of the vice president was to be incredibly loyal to the president, and that she was not, going to go into this job trying to outshine him in any way.
Yeah. He could have picked Carol Moseley Braun. I don't know. There are a lot of black women out there that wouldn't have been an obvious successor. That's the thing that is flummoxing, right, to me. When it just goes to this question of like Joe Biden's judgment to have like kind of got us into this predicament where it was, he was 78 or whatever when he was first running. Like he knew he was going to be the oldest president ever. Mm-hmm. He knew that if he picked somebody like Vice President Harris, who was seen as a rising star, that they would be seen as the successor. You say that they said that they were impressed by her preparedness during the vetting process, but then they've done nothing to help her demonstrate that level of preparedness, or to demonstrate that they believe that she's prepared, or anything. Like I feel like they've really hung her out to dry in a lot of ways, and your reporting reveals a lot of that. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, one reason it is so flummoxing was that, not only were there people Biden could have picked who were not obvious successors to him, if that's something that he didn't want to have to deal with. The thing is, he put out quite clearly that he wanted that dynamic in his administration. He said, I want to be a bridge to the next generation of the party. As I put it in my piece, the way he sort of marketed his presidency to voters was like a lawn tending exercise, basically. Let me get things stable again, and then I will step aside, and this will be a generational handoff. So, ostensibly, Kamala Harris is a great pick for that, if that is in fact actually what you want to do with your presidency. But what we saw pretty quickly is that Joe Biden, nor the people around him, were especially interested in actually investing the time to prepare Kamala Harris for that kind of generational handoff for just a moment such as this, right? This is why this moment has been so fascinating to me, because in many ways, it's what Joe Biden pledged to voters he would be prepared for, that he was almost anticipating in a way, and that stepping aside would just be part of the natural order of things, because he had already sort of cultivated a great profile for this woman who is second in line.
Yeah. So then I guess we get to, she gets picked and she's in the vice presidency. And then there's this kind of opaque chicken and egg question. It's kind of hard to determine from the outside, which is, did the Biden team not set her up for success? Or, did a couple of her stumbles early on, you kind of shake her own confidence and the Biden team's confidence in her. And we ended up in a place where she kind of became a little bit removed, because of her own performance skills or abilities, public facing performance abilities, at least. And that was not really, kind of remedied until she found something that she could sink her teeth into, like the abortion issue. Like which one of those frames do you think feels more accurate?
So both, and I think they relate to each other, and I'm going to explain to you why. So if you'll indulge me, here's where I think a counterfactual is actually useful, where what does it look like for a president to actually invest in their vice president and the idea of their readiness to potentially take their job one day. I think Eisenhower is a great model for that. Eisenhower is someone who, when he was Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, was really horrified by how unprepared Vice President Truman seemed to step into the role of the presidency after FDR died. I mean, he was kind of traumatized by that. And so when he became president, had Richard Nixon, I mean, don't forget, he hated Nixon personally. I mean, there's no love lost there. But it felt really incumbent upon him that he give Americans the confidence to believe, if something were to happen to me, by the way, at the ripe old age of 62, I believe Eisenhower was the oldest president that we'd had at the time. What does he do? He immediately sends Richard Nixon, Pat Nixon, on a 68-day tour of Asia and the Middle East, like his first task for them, really. And so the Nixons come back and there are all these Life spreads and Look magazine spreads about how this is the diplomat in training, somebody who had right off the bat showcased their ability to hobnob with world leaders and form these relationships. Now, did he actually accomplish anything? No, but that wasn't really the point. The optics of it were important. The public saw this as a very, very serious person. So what does Joe Biden do? His first assignment to Kamala Harris. It is to give her the so-called root causes issue of immigration. So that is, as I'm sure your listeners know, but I'll just repeat, tending to or trying to trying to take care of the violence and the poverty and these other conditions in Central American countries that cause migrants to flee north in the first place. What is the benchmark of success for something like that? I mean, at best,
we're going to solve gang violence in rural Guatemala. That's going to be the vice president's job.
Kamala Harris is going to fix Honduras by the end of the fiscal quarter. No, of course not. So he gives her this, impossible issue, really, to where she's not sort of set up for a win to begin with. And then after that, and this is on her, she wants the issue of voting rights. Absolutely no chance that was ever getting to the president's desk without the elimination of the filibuster. So you have this setup, and I'm getting to the second part of what you said now. You have this setup where you have a president who is not giving her the portfolio at the outset to, demonstrate confidence to the American people that she was the right choice or whatnot. But then you have Kamala herself, who really struggled with communication early on. Everybody remembers the Lester Holt interview. To this day, when I talk to people about Kamala Harris, they will bring up the Lester Holt interview. And rather than using that stumble there as an opportunity to say, okay, well, I'm going to blink at the airwaves now and just talk and talk and talk until nobody remembers that interview, she completely retreated from view. And that became sort of the touchstone by which anyone understood the vice president by the end of that year. And so it was just kind of a mess all around, both for reasons kind of driven by Biden himself, but also Harris herself.
Okay, so let's then, I think that the Lester Holt interview presents an example of some of her weaknesses. And you talk about this in the piece at length. But before we get that, I do want to go to the Nixon comparison and some of the strengths that I think that she doesn't get a lot of credit for. And you write about this. And I've had a chance to listen to the vice president talk about foreign affairs. And I think a lot of people probably haven't really actually listened to her talk about it. And I came away from that being pretty impressed by the seriousness with which she has taken on the diplomatic side of things, by the depth of knowledge about foreign leaders, about passion about America's role in the world. And I think that a lot of casuals don't, those aren't the things that go viral. And I noticed that you also mentioned that in the article. So talk a little bit about kind of the Kamala, the diplomat, and maybe how that might surprise some people.
I think surprise is a great word. And Tim, the way I reacted to her when I went on the Africa trip with her was exactly as you did, sort of listening to her speak in that capacity for the first time. It was really utter surprise. I had not covered her much before that. I had obviously seen the clips that had gone viral and things like that. And so my impression, what vague impression I had of her, was based off of that. I go on the Africa trip and I remember thinking, and have I missed something? I mean, have I just fundamentally misunderstood this person, or has this been out there and I just haven't been paying attention? Because what I saw, from Ghana to Zambia to Tanzania was an incredibly serious world leader who, was really at ease around others, really, spoke directly with leaders in a way I could tell they really respected and responded to very well. All of that is to say, I've often wondered, what if moments like that had in fact been at the outset of her vice presidency? What if that had been sort of the first impression Americans had of their vice president? Would we be having this conversation? Is Kamala Harris prepared for the presidency to the degree that we are today? But beyond Africa, she has represented the United States at the Munich Security Conference at least twice now.
Yep.
She most recently represented the United States at the Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland. And I would venture that most Americans don't know that at all. I mean, to the extent Americans pay attention to foreign affairs at all, right? But I guess my point is, if what Americans first understood of Kamala Harris on TV, if the first kind of cable news encounter, social media encounter they ever had of her was a clip of her interacting with a foreign leader and not, the Lester Holt interview or some such, I think her vice presidency could have unfolded a lot differently.
Yeah. And this is why a lot of this is PR, right? I mean, because people just don't know a lot of the details of a lot of this stuff, right? And, Paul Ryan had the reputation of being a wonky person because he cultivated the reputation of being a wonky person, not because people really looked at the charts and graphs he put out and judged that he was doing good at, he's being a good economist, right? And so in theory, that presents an opportunity for her, right, to kind of represent herself in a different way. The question then is she capable of that, right? And I think that is maybe some of the worries that people have, not so much is she smart enough to do the job, or some of the sexist nonsense you hear from some quarters. But I think in the Democratic world, in good faith world, there is can she present in a strong enough way, right? And you talked about how her style is sometimes exacerbates the concerns, particularly in these panel settings. So kind of talk about what you saw on the road with her, and those challenges.
I think the best way to understand why Kamala Harris can seem to trip over herself quite a bit and seem to leave a lot of these kind of panel discussions with gaps trailing in her wake is useful to understand through the lens of her background. So she was, of course, district attorney of San Francisco. She was then the attorney general of California. And I want you to think about, when you think about your DA, is that the person you're going out to see, on the stump one day speak imaginatively about the American experiment or democracy or anything like that? No, you probably don't know their name, first of all, if you're really being honest. And second, if you're voting for them, it's because you looked online and saw that, they had a good conviction rate and, not much else. It's very kind of metrics determined. I think the way that most people historically have tried to understand who they're voting for DA. And that is a campaign mode in which Kamala Harris thrives. So when she was running for DA of San Francisco, her pitch was essentially, I am the incumbent, but I'm better. His conviction rate for felonies is very low. I'm going to raise it. And she did by 14 points or something like that. And that's why she was reelected. So for her, communication was never a matter of kind of gauzy rhetoric, because it was just very easy for her to say, look, here's what I said I would do. And these are the numbers that show you that I did it. And that to her is, making a pitch, making a case. Obviously, the further you get from the ground level of politics, once you get up into the White House, that just becomes implausible, essentially. People want to hear from their national leaders about the American experiment. They want to hear about the shining city on the hill. They want to hear the finest hour speech. And I remember she said to me once, well, my career has not been about giving lovely speeches. And I also remember thinking that's a lot of the ball game as president or vice president at the end of the day, when it comes to how your constituents actually feel about you. So I think here's the pattern that emerges then. You go to panels with her, she gets on a stage, and the first question, whoever's up there with her, is one of those sort of kind of broad platitudinal questions that's like, tell us about the state of democracy right now, or tell us about, all this administration has done and what you see as the future of this country. And she usually kind of bombs. It's one of those, you're edge of the seat, but not in a good way. And it's uncomfortable, because she just gets kind of lost in the woods. It's just not her forte. But once the talk gets rolling, inevitably what happens is she will metaphorically kind of take the microphone back from the people she's talking to, and she'll start asking them questions. They'll be like, how did you get here? What is your American story? And once she gets in control of the conversation in that way, I think she really starts to shine. And that's when you see, at this point, I know it's such a cliche, but this prosecutor mode come out of Kamala Harris. And, that was what fueled her star to begin with, right? Her questioning of Brett Kavanaugh, her questioning of Jeff Sessions and other Donald Trump nominees for the cabinet, things like that. So when she can kind of, finagle situations where she is back in that mode, I think you really get a glimpse of how she even got this far to begin with. And that's why I think a lot of, Democrats I'm talking to right now who are eager for Biden to step aside, they really think that 4 months out from the election is really a kind of perfect, ideal time for someone like Kamala Harris to be the nominee, when it is more about prosecuting the case against someone else.
And that was the next thing I was going to say, because I agree with that. We don't know. It's a known unknown, right? But you spent so much time with her. It seems like she has that gear, of making, again, maybe not the finest hour speech, but of making an impassioned plea about something, making an impassioned case about something or against something, even more to the point. And you can feel her passion at times on specific things, right? And so in a shortened, in a truncated race that's less about bio, where it's like 10 Democrats on stage,
yes.
Right? Like, wouldn't that play to her strengths, don't you think? Yeah,
totally. Because we're 4 months out. You're not trying to craft your myth of origin in that time and sell Americans on your American journey or what have you. I could not agree more. I mean, your profile at this point would be, can you get on a debate stage and make a case against Donald Trump if you're the Democratic nominee?
Would be a step up from the current, situation where the current candidate is not capable of stepping up on a stage and making a case against Donald Trump. That's where we're at right now. Yeah.
Check one.
Let's go to that. Okay, 2 more things before I lose you. Let's go to that origin story, though, because it is interesting. In a primary, which we already saw her stumble in, you do kind of have to come up with a myth, right? Or some narrative about yourself, right? Because there are 10 candidates and most of them agree on everything. Maybe there's 1 or 2 issues you all disagree on, but you're trying to separate in a certain way. These candidates have this, they're the famous ones. McCain is a POW, but Scranton Joe, and everybody kind of has something. Even Trump's is fake, but the businessman and the apprentice, right? Did you glean anything from Kamala? Because that is the one thing that is notable, I think, that it's that maybe part of the reason why people feel like they're not connecting with her, is not just her performance skills, but that like she isn't showing a lot of herself, right? And that like even me as a political obsessive that hosts a political podcast, I'm like, besides the basic like resume stuff, like the LinkedIn bio, what else do I know about Kamala Harris? And there are a few things, right? She likes to cook, and the stepkids call her Mamala and all that. Like, there's a few things, but was there anything else from the origin story and in the time you spent with her, or any other observations along those lines?
Well, I'll point out, Tim, that the reason that not even a political obsessive like you can immediately kind of call up moments from this larger bio is that, and this gets to her risk aversion, she learned pretty quickly in the presidential primary that her actual story and what she wanted to tell to voters about her background as a prosecutor, which she is immensely proud of, she was told by several of her advisors that was not going to fly in today's Democratic Party, in the Democratic Party of 2020, I should say, in particular. So you saw the Kamala as a cop memes, run reckless
another thing
abandon.
that could work in her favor in a 3.5 month campaign that went into a Democratic primary. Maybe
look how much has changed in 4 years. But I think because of that, she had people around her saying, your actual bio is not going to gel with this base. And so you need to essentially talk about yourself as someone you are not. And I think when people talk about or complain about the inauthenticity of Kamala Harris, that what they interpret it to be, all of those racist and sexist undertones aside, I think it is often because they don't believe they're hearing from someone who believes what she herself is saying about her own life. And I just think that traces back to the primary and the advice she was getting at the time. Well,
no matter whether Joe Biden steps aside or you stay as vice president, if you're listening, the vice president or advisors, just shut the fucking advisors up. Let it rip. Let it rip. Like, the more Kamala, the better, I think, is the more prosecutor Kamala, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And speaking of let it rip, I would be very remiss if I let you go without asking you to help me diagram a sentence. Here is something that the vice president likes to say. Elaina, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree. No, you exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. Talk to us about that. Why she likes saying that so much?
Well, her mother said it to her, first of all. She was very, very close with her late mother. And the message for her was, don't forget where you came from. And so another line she likes to say often is, I stand always recognizing the broad shoulders upon which I stand.
Yeah.
That's another Kamalaism that when you're with her long enough, that one will come out a lot. So I think the two are
I would have liked that better if it wasn't for the fact that Mike Pence talked about Trump's broad shoulders all the time. And so just hearing broad shoulders gives me the heebie-jeebies now, but that's not really her fault.
Well, now you're going to do that to me.
Thing.
Now
sorry.
I'm going to think about that. What I find interesting, though, and people have pointed this out, is the message of you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree, you exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. There's also her line that is thinking about what can be unburdened by what has been. So suddenly,
you do seem a little bit in conflict.
Yeah.
But you didn't fall out of a coconut tree.
But maybe we're waiting for that secret third thing that just kind of fuses it all together.
Yeah. Maybe it's aspirational. That's what I think. I think that what she's trying to do is say aspirational, which is that in reality, you think that you fell out of a coconut tree, but you didn't. You didn't. Mm-hmm. You are a product of everything that came before you.
Absolutely.
But aspirationally, we want to live in a future that is unburdened by all of the sins of the coconut tree. That's how I would like to define it.
I think both of these messages are very good.
You're just wondering. We're just trying to work out how they work in concert with one another.
I do appreciate, though, how these sort of newcomers in the K-Hive call themselves coconut pilled.
Yeah,
that is sort of their
I think I might be coconut pilled. I might be getting. I don't know if I'm in the K-Hive, but I might be slowly getting coconut pilled. I'm not sure. Because then I guess my final point is part of the reason why I'm getting coconut pilled is because part of the context from which we came that maybe I didn't appreciate enough was that I do think that the president has left her in a really bad situation. And going back to reread your article, this lame quotes they gave about her and like the unwillingness to put her forward, given the danger that they all knew that they were placing us in with an aging president, I just think it was really irresponsible. And I don't know. Now I'm kind of thinking that I might be coconut pilled, that maybe she might be able to stand up to the moment. But anyway, final thought on that, as we just think about the Biden of this all, because I do think it hangs I think we would be remiss to just not acknowledge the reality that the Biden team's feelings about Kamala hang over the questions about his candidacy right now in a real way. Yeah. And
as you pointed out, when I would try to talk with them about her, I mean, even the White House chief of staff, I mean, you go into those calls and you've been in comms a long time, Tim. You need your candidate prepared with like one or two anecdotes that when they say X, Y, Z, okay, give me a moment when that felt true. Okay, here's one. And then the reporters love that. We love the detail. Right. We love to show that the lead anecdote or whatever. And when I asked White House chief of staff Jeff Zients, who's talking about, Biden really considers her a governing partner. He really relies on her advice for just about everything. I said, okay, can you tell me about a time when he noticeably relied on her for guidance? And he did mention, he was like, well, she was essential to putting equity at the forefront of our COVID response. At that time, COVID was really ebbing. And okay, tell me about another time. Is there another issue? And he was like, okay, there's so many, I'll have to get back to you on that. And I followed up and I just never got that anecdote. So even just from a sheer optics perspective, you're not even willing to invest the time, I don't know, to
make something up.
That she's as much of a governing partner as you're saying that she is. I mean, to me, it's irresponsible not just to this vice president that you purport to really care about and her future that you really purport to care about, but also just the country.
I agree. Frustrating. Okay. Thank you so much for coming back. Are you working on anything else fun?
Yeah. Are we still? Yeah.
Is it secret? We're taping? Okay. How about that? We'll leave that. We'll leave that in the green room. Elaina will tell me what she's working on, and I will get to keep it as a secret. And we'll have her back. We'll have her back to talk to all the rest of you about it pretty soon, I hope. Thank you so much, and we'll see y'all back here tomorrow. Peace.